Welcome to the Danny Clinkscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Insightful and witty commentary, probing interviews, and detours from the beaten path.
Welcome to Arts and Lifestyle Wednesday, presented by Cinematic Visions. In a rather interesting coincidence of timing, a new presentation opens at the New Theater Restaurant tonight as Cindy Williams stars in Church Basement Ladies. It was not planned that this was going to be presented. This podcast was going to be presented on the date of an opening of a theater presentation, but certainly it is appropriate. Williams of Laverne and Shirley fame continues one of the ongoing traditions at the New Theater, as many familiar television personalities have graced the stage over the years, such as the subject of a recent Kansas City Profiles podcast right here at Danny Clinkscale's Reasonably Irreverent podcast, Hal Linden. The New Theater opened in 1992, continuing a legacy and business plan started in 1992 by Richard Carrothers and Dennis Hennessey, who would open Tiffany's Attic Playhouse and soon Waldo Astoria Playhouse to great success. After a successful financial stint in Hollywood as producers, the two returned to Kansas City to consolidate their efforts in the New Theater Restaurant, which has had a live production going continuously all the time ever since. The theater has become part of the fabric of Kansas City, and it was a pleasure to catch up recently with Richard Carrothers and sit down and talk about his story and eventually that of the theaters and the business of them, the operations, the stars, and more. Our Kansas City Profiles, presented by Cinematic Visions with Richard Carrothers of the New Theater Restaurant, starts next. Cinematic Visions has been an affordable solution for professional media production in Kansas City since 2003, offering award-winning video production and creation, as well as a wide array of digital and social media management services. From planning, scripting, filming, editing, and post-production, to delivering your product to a watching world, Cinematic Visions will provide professional and affordable services for you and your business with the necessary return on investment to make it all worthwhile. Cinematic Visions' goal is to unlock the power of storytelling through video and a strong online presence for your company. Beyond the numbers, they want to inspire and evoke your clients to feel and act. Let my friends at Cinematic Visions embed your brand where it belongs, in your customers' minds. You can find them online at cinematicvisions.com or with a quick phone call at 816-600-6300. Are you thinking of starting a new business? Does your current business feel stuck? Or are you just trying to grow what you already have? Running a business is a lot of work, and it takes the right team to make it all happen. If you're looking to grow your business, call my friends Ben and Greg over at Fuego Consulting. They put together a company that can help you reach your business goals. Whether you're looking to get online, build a social media strategy, or rebrand your business, they can help. Call Fuego at 816-663-9695 or visit them online at fuegoconsulting.com. Fuego Consulting. Let's grow your business together.
If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at danny@dannyclinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you.
Richard, let's find out a little bit about you before we find out a little bit about your career. Tell me where you grew up and what your childhood was like and what your influences were as a young person.
So let me see if I can shortcut this. I was born in Iowa to a farmer who also had an educational degree, and we moved to Liberty, Missouri on a farm when I was 3 years old, and I was a farm boy. And then at age 13, my father was killed in a tractor accident, and my mother and I had to run a 360-acre farm. So you learn about organization and business very, very quickly.
I would imagine you do. What kind of impact did that have? 13 is a very impressionable age. From the way you describe, you were an only child. Is that correct?
No, I had a brother, but he had just been accepted into Annapolis.
Okay.
And we said, you got to go. This is a once-a-lifetime opportunity.
Okay.
I'm still working with therapy to discover what kind of effect it did have on me. But it gave me the opportunity to know my mother much better than most people get to know their mothers. I'll give you an example. It was a cattle farm. And in those days, when you sold the cattle, a buyer would come out, look at the herd, and then come into the kitchen and you would negotiate a price. And in those days, there wasn't such thing as a woman who would sell cattle, and we were losing money hand over fist. And my mother went to the library and learned how to make home brew. but she made it so it was like 15, 20%. She brought the buyers in, got them drunk, and we started making a profit.
What percentage of the truth is that story?
That is the truly absolute truth. I wouldn't dishonor my mother. And it gives you some insight, though, on... I learned very quickly through diversity, if you stick with it, you can overcome it. That's the greatest lesson she taught me.
Yeah. Because, she was obviously suffering from, prejudice at that point and being taken advantage of. A woman can't be a business person, and you were probably a little too young to have much assertiveness in that area. So it sounds like a plan. Also, they probably thought they were just drinking regular old beer, right?
Well, and not only that, my mother was attractive, and so she flirted like crazy with him. I mean, she used all the assets she was given.
There you go.
But I attribute a lot of, and I use this word loosely, success to what my mother taught me.
When you, at this particular age, you're working so hard, you're operating a farm, was there time for you to start to develop the interests that would eventually carry you through life?
As a cancer survivor, sometimes spiritual things happen out of chaos. And my mother, I'd never expressed any interest in the theater or the arts, and my mother, a year after my father died, said, you know what, I'm going to get us tickets to the Lyric Opera. And she was a farm girl. She didn't know from opera. And I think spiritually she knew what my path was, and she was preparing me for that. I know that's a real woo-woo story, but it's the truth. And I can remember we went to the opera when it was over on the Rock Hill. Mm-hmm. First time I'd ever seen live theater in my life. And back in those days, in the 50s, nobody died. The good guy didn't die on television. And we saw La Boheme, and Mimi, of course, dies. And I can remember sitting there sobbing at the end.
Wow, that's
it was
something.
life-altering.
Yeah, my wife's an opera singer and
really?
sang professionally for a long time and still sings. She's going to Europe in a couple of weeks to do a recital. But so I have an appreciation for opera. I still can't say that it's my thing, but I hear it every day. and I also appreciate the incredible technique and exactitude that it takes. I mean, there's no riffing in opera. You have the chops and hit the notes, or you're screwed.
Or and it used to be staging for opera was park and bark.
Right.
But now it's being staged more like it's a legitimate theater piece, which I respect. So
did you immediately take to this when you started to see theater and think it might be something you'd like to do, or was that a slow process?
Well, when I got into high school, where I lived was outside of Liberty, Missouri, and we had a choice of going to high school in Liberty or North Kansas City, and I went to North Kansas City. And I found all of a sudden I got involved with speech, debate, and that led to, I don't know if you know the National Forensic League.
Yes. The real NFL. Right?
Yes, the artsy NFL. And I became very involved in dramatic reading, and I've always been very competitive. And as a sophomore, I said, I want to go to nationals. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I went to nationals representing Missouri and made it all the way to finals. And there was 6 of us, 5 girls and 1 guy, and I went, I got this made. I came in 6th. But so I think that really sharpened my edge was the National Forensic League in high school and a great dramatics teacher. I think that really showed me the path for my career.
You know, so often a teacher can be an incredible influence in your life. I had a teacher who I actually wrote a whole chapter in the book I wrote about cancer, and she was my 6th grade teacher, remarkably enough, that early she had a tremendous impact on me. But I think that stories like that are very commonplace, where one teacher can really create a life's path for somebody, and that seemed to happen for you.
What was your teacher's name, do you mind saying?
Miss Rubinwich was her name. She eventually became Mrs. Friedberg, breaking my heart when she became Mrs. Friedberg, as a matter of fact. But what was your teacher's name?
Miss Fulton. She was like one of those archetypal drama teachers who had dedicated her life to theater, never married, just had dogs.
Right. So you went on to so when it was time to go to college, was this starting to be part of your world? And you went to UMKC eventually. But. We didn't have
much money, and so there wasn't money for me to go to college, and I was offered a scholarship at Springfield. Back then it was called Southwest Missouri State, SMS, and so I went there for 2 years. And in the middle of my second year there, I did an audition for UMKC, and I landed a role at Rep. And they also offered me a scholarship for my last 2 years, so that's why I got my degree from there.
And how was that developing your muse, as it were?
Well, I was lucky. At that season, there were 3 out of the 4 shows had roles for young men that looked 19, 20, and I played all 3 of them. And I can remember one review, Giles Fowler in The Star from Twelfth Night. I played Ague Cheek, and the first sentence was like, a brilliant production with only one flaw. I was the flaw.
Or the perceived flaw in his mind.
Yes.
Anyway.
It was enough then to kind of shake me and say, gee, do I want to be this vulnerable the rest of my life? And so the following season, there wasn't any roles for a person my age, and there was an opening for house manager. And being a farm boy, it's like, you name it, I can do it.
Right.
And I became house manager, and I think that really sort of turned me in another direction, that there was more than being on stage. There were other aspects of theater that really appealed to me as well.
And you started to be involved in producing shows and things like that. How did that develop?
Real quick story. When I was an undergraduate at UMKC, only the graduate students could stage shows in their experimental theater. And I really thought that was unfair. It should be based on talent, not what age you were. So I did a production of Waiting for Godot in the Student Union.
Wow.
Yeah, got the space. We built the set, did it in the round. And that, again, was very instructive to me of you didn't have to play by everybody else's rule in theater, that you could make them up as you go along.
Right. That sounds like a plan.
And I have to give this, too. Everybody who's from UMKC has heard of Dr. Mack. I mean, she's a legend. If you look right over there, your people can't see it.
I can see it, yes.
It's a picture of Dr. McElrath. And she was inspiring in that rather than being one of those kind of head of a department that said, well, you're an undergraduate, you can't go to the student union and ask that, she said, if you can make it happen, go for it. She's that kind of an inspirational woman.
Well, you seem to have had that idea throughout your life and career, because at a pretty young age you took on, trying to create your own theaters. And Tiffany's Attic was the first one, and that just was created out of, a laundry or something like that?
Yeah, well, more than 50% of this business success goes to my business partner, right. Dennis Hennessey. Mm-hmm. And I graduated from UMKC, didn't have a job, and there was an opening for a janitor at the Jewish Community Center. Really what it was Dennis was the artistic director there. He wanted somebody to build sets, mm-hmm. But they said, you don't have a budget for it, but you do have a budget for a janitor. So I applied and got the position as janitor and also build the sets for him. And that's when our friendship built, we turned the resident theater into a moneymaker for the Jewish Community Center, where it was just for their memberships before. It was actually making them money. But it became a case of the tail wagging the dog. And so that's when Dennis and I said, you know what, let's go start our own theater. It's very Mickey Judy. Don't ask me which one I am. And literally I said, Dennis, there's this thing in Washington. There's like 6 or 7 of them called dinner theaters. We could do that. And, that was back in the days before there was all the government regulations. And keep in mind now, I'm a Democrat. So when I talk about government regulations, and I know they have to be in place, but today you couldn't do what Dennis and I did because there are too many regulations. When we took over when we did Tiffany's Attic, as you said, it was an old garage for a laundry. We jackhammered the ditches and put our own plumbing in. You couldn't do that today. You have to have a licensed plumber. It's $90 an hour. You couldn't do back then, now what we did back then. But that's how Tiffany's Attic was born.
And how much of a risk did you feel like it was? How quickly did it become a reasonable success? Everybody now, the name just rings a bell in anybody's head, but was it a struggle at the start, or did it kind of work from the start? And it's a spiritual thing. There's those things that when you're connected what you should be doing and the path, that just everything happens correctly, just doors open. By the time we had a fabulous head of marketing,
and we were able to market right. So by the time we opened our doors, the first month was already sold out.
Wow.
Yeah. We knew somebody who was a director in Florida, and he said, I've got a couple friends that can do a show for you. One is by the name of Barney Martin. At that time, I didn't know who Barney Martin was. He'd won a couple Tonys. I believe in the original Chicago, he was the cellophane man.
Right.
And then he said, and there's this girl from Texas. She's going to be something. Her name's Patsy Calmes. We hired her, who became Morgan Fairchild.
Right.
But we opened with Last of the Red Hot Lovers, Barney Martin and Morgan Fairchild.
You purposely called it Tiffany's Playhouse because you thought people would think theater would make it too highbrow? Was that marketing's idea, or what was the idea?
No, that's it exactly. Theater, not only highbrow, but theater hadn't been a commercial success in the theater. So we thought by calling it a playhouse, which is in Europe a pretty traditional, it's a playhouse. We thought it gave it more a sense of fun. Right.
And tell us about the journey of Tiffany's Playhouse.
The name came through. It was a laundry, and there was a garage where the trucks had to pull in and load the laundry because you can't do it like a standard loading dock because they'd get wet or whatever. So it was a huge open space with no columns where the trucks could pull in. And we were able to rent it, and we turned that area into the seating area, built up risers, and there was a big skylight there, huge skylight, maybe 12 feet by 8 feet. And we hired the Kansas City, some students from the Kansas City Art Institute to create a stained glass, so the skylight looked stained glass, like it was a Tiffany stained glass. Right. And that came the title Tiffany's Attic.
And soon you'd open up another theater, and what was the ambition to do so?
Goes back to my business partner. He has a degree from Harvard in arts management. After the first year, it was so successful, he said, you know what? We're going to have competitors, and it's going to make our life more difficult. Why don't we be our own competitor? I said, what do you mean? He said, let's open another one. So we immediately, a year later, opened Waldo Astoria.
And what was the way that you tried to make them either unique or in tandem? What was the idea behind that?
Wasn't much thought other than we wanted to corner the market. So if we were selling out and there was people who couldn't get in, the people who couldn't get in, we wanted those in the other theaters. So they pretty much did the same thing.
Right. And how long did you operate both theaters?
Let's see, without making this boring, in the early 80s, one of the pieces we had done was remember the play called Charlie's Aunt?
Yes.
And a guy from Universal flew out to see it, and he said, we'd like to have you stage it with stars and then turn it and then sell it to cable. Showtime, I think it was. So that was so successful, we said, gee, we want to do more of this. So in the 80s, we opened a film and television division in L.A. for 10 years. And at the end of the 10 years in Hollywood, both Dennis and I said, this is not a place where we want to live the rest of our life. So we said, let's go back. And let me tell you, we were burning ourselves out with 2 theaters as well. Let's close down both theaters and open one large theater where we can focus more on quality. And so our decision was first we closed the Waldo Astoria, and then we closed Tiffany's Attic and immediately opened the new theater. With an exception, I am proud of this. With an exception of 1 week, we have had an equity show on stage in Kansas City for 47 years with only 1 week down.
That's remarkable. I guess you've got it up and running to the point where you can go on vacation, I hope?
You laugh.
No.
I don't know what vacation is, and it's hard for me to enjoy.
More of Danny's Reasonably Irreverent podcast after this.
We're here with Joe Spiker, the president of Easton Roofing. And Joe, you worked for other companies in the construction industry. What inspired you to start your own company in Easton Roofing?
Well, Danny, when you are working for somebody else, you oftentimes don't get to see the project through from beginning to end, and you don't get the final control over the customer experience. And I wanted to build a place where people can come and get work done on their house and not have to worry about being treated the wrong way and get a good customer service experience start to finish.
The company slogan is "Where Integrity Matters." Why is that so particularly important to you?
Well, for us, what that means is treating each other with respect at work, treating our clients with respect, and making the right choice, especially when no one's looking. So when you're presented all the time as a contractor with choices that have to be made, are you going to make more money on this if you cut a corner? And we just wanted to make a place and a slogan that said to our people and to whoever is our customer, we're not going to do that. We're going to make the right choice regardless of profit.
Easton Roofing, where integrity matters.
For many people, a family law case will be one of the most difficult experiences in their life. The law firm of Kenneth McRae will help you through it. Personal and effective help from Ken in concert with you will develop a unique strategy for your unique case. As Ken always says, divorce can be civil law, not civil war. Licensed in Kansas? Visit McRaeLawOffice.com or call 913-972-4765.
Hey guys, it's Brian Haney, voice of the Jayhawks, and Matt Llewellyn from the 23rd Street Brewery. Matt, I've got a bunch of buddies coming over to watch the big game, and I need some ideas on what to cook.
Hey, let me handle it, Brian.
You're going to come over and cook for us?
For you? Maybe. But you should just let 23rd Street Brewery cater it. We could bring a big pan of Bill Self mac and cheese, wings, veggies, naked nachos, and anything else you might want.
Great. Well, you want to stick around and watch the game?
No, I've got to get back to the brewery and watch it on the big screen.
The place to get great catering and watch all the games, the 23rd Street Brewery in Lawrence.
If you'd like to join these and other great sponsors and market your business to a growing and engaged audience, contact us at Danny@DannyKlinkscale.com. Look forward to hearing from you. We're visiting with Richard Carrothers, co-owner with his partner Dennis D. Hennessey of the New Theater and Restaurant. And
you got that right, thank you.
Yeah, well,
the ampersand is really important.
It's written down here. I ought to get it right. New Theater, ampersand, Restaurant. Did you have any kind of different idea of what you wanted to do when you had the decided to close the two theaters and then have the one with the New Theater Restaurant?
Well, both Tiffany's Attic and Waldorf Story, if you've never seen them, they were makeshift stages, at best makeshift. So we were very limited technically we could do. Because each one only seated about 300 people, because of the income, we were limited to how many actors we could bring in out of town, what the quality of production. We felt with a 600-seat theater, we could bring to Kansas City the kind of commercial theater that we'd always wanted to do.
Right. And was the idea behind the restaurant aspect always on the table? Or
we both said, gee, what would it be like to do theater without a restaurant? We said, well, the formula seems to be working, but here's what we'll do with the new theater. When you get a ticket, you can either specify whether you want table service or the buffet, or none at all. And overwhelmingly, I guess because we'd had 20-some years where people liked the buffet, everybody chose the buffet. So we said, let's give them what they want.
Right. You're right. I didn't attend those two, so I didn't know there was food at those. When you start a theater and you're going to make it with food, what are the pros and cons of doing that?
Oh, all cons. No, well, like if you have bad food and a good show, the likelihood of you going back is cut in half. Or you have a bad show and good food, the likelihood is cut in half. And you've been reading how many restaurants have been going under here in Kansas City. The restaurant business is a tough business. The bar business is a rough business. Theater is a rough business. So you're taking three potential losers and putting them together. We've just been blessed. I think the thing that makes it popular, and I get this the older I get, it's sure convenient. If you go to a regular theater, and I'm not denigrating that, and you go out to eat, you have to hope to God you get in on time and you get out on time and you find a parking place and then you get there. And then as you're walking from the parking lot to the theater, you hope to God it's not raining and you get wet and sit through the first act wet. The great thing about this is it's convenient. Mm-hmm. You go in, you have a terrific dinner and see a show in your home.
As you were developing your businesses and being so successful and going to California, what turns did your personal life take? What was your personal life journey during this extremely busy business enterprise you would always be in?
I met the love of my life in California. And he and I are married now, and we've been together for 33 years. And we have a family. We have a son from China and a daughter from Guatemala. And our son's at Iowa University and our daughter's at St. Teresa's. And she's going to be a vet. And I'm more proud of that than anything I've ever done in theater.
How'd you meet the love of your life?
He was best friends with a guy I was dating, and then I found out he was dating Olivia Newton-John's boyfriend.
Okay.
My boyfriend. And so his best friend and I just were friends, and then one thing led to another. Old story.
Right. When you've gone through the journey of the New Theater Restaurant, part of the idea behind it, obviously, is familiar faces and stars. And also part of it is any business venture is reading an audience and figuring out what kind of an audience you are trying to sell your product to. How did you figure out a Kansas City audience who wanted to go to dinner theater?
Gee, we're still figuring that out. It's sort of like Lady Gaga and Madonna. You constantly have to reinvent yourself. And so we're always looking how to reinvent ourselves in terms of maybe switching a style of food, the type of show. And then when you're open to that, to reinvent yourself, the audience very quickly says, I like it, I don't like it. I'll give you an example. We did a world premiere of a thing called something, let's see, what was it? It was called Have You Met Miss Jones? And it was the life story of Shirley Jones.
Wow.
And we had extraordinary writers work on it. Richard Maltby was the director. Richard Maltby has won 2 or 3 Tonys. He started off by directing and writing Ain't Misbehavin'. And it was a deeply moving show about her life and success. And, remember some of the movies?
Sure.
Carousel, Music Man.
Oh,
big time. And then on television, it was what? The Partridge
Family,
Yeah.
Yes.
And the audience didn't like it, and they stayed away in droves, and we lost $250,000 on it.
Wow!
So it'll be.
What do you think? Do you think that maybe her? When was this particular production?
Just 2 or 3 years ago.
So was it? Do you think her name had faded enough that people didn't remember, or what? What? Did you ever kind of figure out what?
I can tell you exactly, and here's how it works at our business at this time. People leave the theater, and they're your marketing pro or con. Forget television, forget newspapers. If you send the people out and they go to work the next day and say, I saw a great show last night, I had a really great time, you don't need advertising. And I think people left and they said, it was a strange show I saw last night. I'm not sure about it.
Did you get that sense when you decided to do the show? Did you think it was, let's put it this way, did you think it was a good show? Obviously you did.
Let me put it this way. We have what's called producer's rehearsal, and we have a guest director. Dennis and I, after 3 weeks, comes into rehearsal, and we give notes. And I have never seen Dennis weep at the end of a performance. It was so moving. I think it was a piece better suited for a very small rehearsal hall.
Right.
I don't think Shirley carried to a big house.
Right.
I think it's something you had to experience. Mm-hmm. And then also when she got in front of an audience, she didn't blossom, she withered. We had to put, and I'm just saying for a fact, we had to put teleprompters around the stage so that if somebody in the audience distracted her, she could go to the text.
Was it what she just at a point in her career where she couldn't do it, or was the story too personal for her?
I don't know. I'll never know that.
Yeah.
I'll never know that.
So you do a lot of shows that are familiar, but you also do shows that maybe, when you look at the title, you don't recognize.
Right.
Have you found any formula where, obviously, the ones that maybe aren't that familiar, I'm looking at Eleanor Donahue and Never Too Late, which, that doesn't ring like South Pacific, but those clearly work too. How do you decide what is going to be a working show?
It certainly helps if you have marquee. The marquee can be a name, a television name, or the name of the show. There's no need to have both, though.
Right.
In terms of cost.
Right. In going to a few of the shows through the years, and I just obviously saw your new show, the Sherwood, The Adventures of Robin Hood, here at the New Theater Restaurant. There's your plug.
Thank you. Thank you.
In looking at is it sort of a standard that maybe the top 4 or 5 actors will be national actors and then the rest is a sort of a local troupe, or is there any kind of a magic number in that regard?
There really isn't. I tell you what, There are certain layers of actors that Kansas City doesn't have, and certain other ones that they're plentiful. I'll give you an example. Men between 30 and 50 who can sing, dance, and act, they're just not here.
Okay.
You have to go to Chicago or New York. Women 30 to 55 who can act, sing, and dance, there's an enormous amount here. So it's the show.
Right.
It's the show.
What's the budgeting like? I mean, I'm not going to ask you for
Sure.
specific figures, but when you look at a show, I know you treat the stars well. I've spoken to them. I just interviewed Hal Linden, obviously. Very pleased with how he's housed and everything else like that. How did you find that balance? Is there a standard sort of local theater rate for people who have big names? How did that develop?
Working in Hollywood didn't hurt. First of all, you have to understand a lot of the people who work here are fairly wealthy. They don't need to work.
Right.
And they live they have a style in Los Angeles where they live. They might have a housekeeper. They might have a gardener. They have some staff. So you can't expect to bring them here and not put them in a house that doesn't have a gourmet kitchen and the kind of things they're used to, even if they don't have a staff.
Right.
In terms of what they pay, we've sort of set our house limit, and that's right for us, and it might not be for any other theater. In terms of what a budget is, if you take the cost of producing the show, getting it up to in front of an audience, and then running a show, a 10-week run show would cost around $500,000.
Mm-hmm. What would you say your percentage of good experiences with stars is against difficult ones who maybe you wouldn't want to have back?
I try, because I've been bit in the butt more than once, I try to do my homework and talk to other producers and directors and say, what was it like? Mm-hmm. And there's only been a couple in the last 10 years that it just didn't work out, and we had to part ways before the opening.
So is there sort of a group of people around the country who you can kind of go to, or is there an informal association or anything like that, or you just have to figure out or find for with your connections through the years people
Hollywood,
that you can trust?
Hollywood connection. I tell you what, people don't realize it. I think people think that the kind of thing like new theater, every city has it. They don't. This is like one of the only in the country. You'll find dinner theaters and other things, but not of this level. So I can't call other producers and directors and say, hey, did you work with Morgan Fairchild? What was it like? But I can call somebody who knows her agent and can get me some information on it.
You certainly have had, Wall Street Journal called this theater the best in the country, period, and without question. How proud does that make you?
I think those sort of things they're good for marketing, but they're not meaningful to me. Right. I mean, I'm a Clydesdale. I'm not a racehorse. I get in the harness and I work hard every day. And so that kind of thing doesn't make a lot of difference to me.
That's very humble. And
no, I don't mean it to be humble. Well, it's just who I am. I'm a workhorse.
Well, it seems like you are indeed a workhorse, which sounds like an odd phrase to use for somebody in the theater. But it also seems to me when you're speaking about this, you clearly love what you do. Yeah. And what is it that you would describe as the love of this particular industry? Obviously, there's difficulties. It's can be the challenges, but you seem to really embrace them and enjoy them.
I think anybody, your wife can lecture you on this. Anybody who's and you as a writer. When you're given the privilege to create, it's spiritual, and it's given me the opportunity to create, to put together a creative culture without ego. So when you're in rehearsal with a group of actors that have the same passion that you do, there's nothing better in the world.
Yeah. How often do you see the shows? I mean, obviously they run for months at a time.
Here's the thing. Once you open a show, it's going to take its own direction, whether you like it or not. Right. And sometimes those directions are not something that bring you joy. Uh-huh. So it's going to depend on the show how much I go back.
Right. We hadn't been to a show here in a bit, and the I can say one thing about the entire presentation of the theater is impressive. I mean, from the people who come in the door, the way the food is presented. Sometimes you think buffet, you're not thinking of high-quality food. That was exactly the opposite of that. How, as a business person, do you decide in that area how far to reach? How to say, hey, we want this to be great, but there has to be a certain, obviously, budgetary concern and everything, just like the actors, but you seem to pull it off well. But what's the challenge there?
From a culinary standpoint?
Yes.
First of all, finding the right person. And we've had a head of culinary now for almost 20 years. And he came from Grand Street Cafe on the Plaza. And what's really great about him is the same thing. It's constantly reinventing yourself, is sneak in a couple unique dishes and see how the people respond. We do, and I know now everybody does it, but we started this 10 years ago before anybody did it. We do a quick survey. We pick 50 people. We give them a survey card. They only have to answer 6 questions. Mm-hmm. So, from studying statistics, if you have about 250 opinions, you're going to know within 5% either way how you're doing in an area. And so we get a lot of feedback on culinary. We know if we're going down the right path or not.
Another thing that it seems to me you should be very proud of is the fact we spoke with our server. He was delightful. And so we had a little bit of repartee with him, and he pointed out that he's a full-time employee and has benefits.
Right.
I was stunned. I mean, that sounds like something that is going above and beyond as a business that isn't, quote-unquote, necessary, but obviously is important to you.
This comes from my business partner who, and I know this will rankle people, but, I'm a Democrat and he's a Republican, but he thinks like a Democrat. And years ago he said, our fortune is really in our staff, and I want to take half of our profits every year and give them to the staff.
Wow.
So we cut it right down the middle, and everybody who's been here for, I think it's more than a year, depending on how many years they get a portion of the profits of this place. So they're all invested.
You're a little bit older than I am. Neither one of us, unfortunately, is young. You seem to be in no mood whatsoever to retire. Do you ever think about something like that? I mean, you look great. You seem to be in wonderful health. We both are cancer survivors, but are unaffected by it, I think, right now. What does the future hold for you in the theater?
It's kind of like if you ask a kid in grade school, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Right.
I think when I grow up, I want to be in something that continues to be creatively challenged. I'm 73. I probably won't be doing this more than 3 or 4 more years, but I will be moving on to something that's creatively challenging.
Have you got any ideas what that is right now?
Gee. No, I don't. But all the kids will be in college, and then, I don't know, we'll just see what it brings.
What would you say, you said before you're a Clydesdale, and you gave all humble answers and said there's good fortune in this and that, but give me a little bit of what you think the legacy is of the theaters that you have brought to Kansas City, and in particular this one, which is such a fabric of the community.
That's tough. I'll try to. For a German, I'm a real emotional person. I get letters all the time, and one in particular, I'll give you an example. A woman said, I didn't know my father had a heart condition, and we came to see, I think it was Fiddler on the Roof, and the following day, he passed. And it will always bring me great joy to remember that day that I had with him, where we laughed, we cried together, we had the experience of seeing Fiddler on the Roof. So if there's one legacy, it's knowing that we really can touch hearts of people. We can make it a familial experience. We can make it an experience that people look back on and say, oh, you remember when we saw that show together? How good life was. I think if that's our legacy, I'm thrilled.
This podcast was made possible by our great sponsors like Easton Roofing, the presenting sponsor of Kansas City Profiles at the Danny Klingscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Easton Roofing, where integrity matters. We hope you enjoyed the latest Danny Klingscale Reasonably Irreverent podcast. Come back soon for something fresh and new.